let's start in the beginning, and I'm going to sort of play and talk as we come through things. The dynamic level says forte, but I would say probably start with a mezzo forte. Now, if you can make it that far, I'd grab a quick breath after that E flat. Throughout the whole piece, we're going to get very quick breaths in there. Second line. So, notice in the second line, the first measure and the second measure, we have little chromatic lines, and what they're outlining is essentially an E flat major arpeggio, which is the key of the etude. So there are little chromatic lines leading up to each chord tone. In the third and fourth bars of line 2, we have the big, large leaps here. And so I suggest practicing those in groups of 2 notes at a time. So I'm putting a dotted rhythm and like a dotted 8th 16th note, and then a 16th dotted 8th to reverse the rhythms a little bit, grouping them in 2s, and then I put the 2 groups together to get 4 notes and practice those. Practice with your metronome, practice without your metronome, both. I'm focusing in on articulating the low note, and if I'm working with an embouchure that's not changing too much, I'm able to have a good memory of where the voicings are for the upper notes, and the notes come out cleanly. A discussion that I'll give at the end of the video here a little bit is about overtones and how to acclimate your embouchure and your oral cavity and your voicing to have a good understanding of where those notes are placed. So I'll continue practicing a little bit to give you a sense of how to develop that third and fourth bar of the second line. In the first beat of that, we have F to D, F to B flat. So one of the things I suggest is working for memory, to memorize this. And don't forget to really push a good amount of air through. I'm taking air from down in here and then filling up my whole cavity. The entire cavity is filled with air. If you don't have air behind this phrase, the notes won't come out. That second beat are outlining a B flat major arpeggio, but broken up. So low D, F, B flat to F. And I'm using a biz B flat, which is the first B key and the little key here. So there are other options for B flats, 1, 2, and the side B flat here, the side bottom side key. But in this case, we're going, unless you have B naturals, which we really don't have them in this piece, we're going to stick with the biz for most of this etude. So the second beat. Now I'll put the 2 together. And that's the way I continue to practice it. Again, you're going to need a lot of air through this to get into that last bar for that low C. One little sort of technique that saxophone players sometimes use is to gently pop this F key to get the low note to speak a little easier. So while I'm moving from certain notes, if I have time to gently give that little pop, it assists in that note starting, along with a good amount of air support and my tongue helping with the reed there. So let's move to the third beat. And then the next bar. So the pattern is changed there. Again, be aware and take these things in groups of 2s, or if you get the group of 2 notes together, put them together. So that last bar. So what I do is I try to work in little groups at a time and then work outwards, moving forward, and then sometimes I work backwards to kind of put it in the context. So what I just did there is we worked on the second line, third bar, little by little. We got into the fourth bar of the second line, and once that started to feel comfortable, again reviewing, I'm thinking, the most important thing in this is air. But if I'm anticipating my right hand first finger a little bit, it helps me to get especially that low C out of the fourth bar. Once I have those third and fourth bars ready on the second line, I backed up a little bit and I kind of tried to put it in context. Overall, this can sound very exercising, this piece. So one of the other things to do is once we really start to understand it and look at the harmonies, we can start to really add dynamics in a convincing way. I wouldn't wait to put the dynamics in. If you can, start to put them in early in your practice process. All right, let's continue. So on the third line, obviously you have an eighth note rest at the end of the second line, so get a good breath there. So if you need to, you might phrase these a little bit by pulling back a little bit and catching breaths. So let's see what 116 feels like, and we'll play a little bit with that tempo, and we'll kind of back off of it a little bit. So here's 116. So some of the passages you'll be able to play possibly at this tempo, and then once we get to the large leaps, that's where the trouble starts, the challenge, I should say. Let's start at the beginning. So it's quite brisk, and ultimately in your audition, your goal should be to play as musically as possible and as precisely as possible. And so in regard to the tempo, if you try to push towards 116 and are really making quite a few note mistakes, then I would strongly suggest to back off your tempo a little bit. Okay, let's talk a little bit about articulation and embouchure. So some of the fundamentals. When I play the saxophone, I like to take the neck strap and push it, or pull it rather, up high enough that the saxophone just falls into the mouth. And then I say the beginning of the letter V, but I don't finish the V like that. I just say V, and I let the saxophone fall in. The beginning of the letter V lets my lower lip just rest on my lower teeth like this. I firm up the corners just a little bit, but essentially when I'm resting like this is essentially what I want the mouth to sort of emulate when I'm playing the saxophone. Okay, so now I keep the corners firm so I don't have air leaking. I always take a strong breath from down here, and then it fills up upwards. I always take a lot of air in as a reserve. Okay, so that's essentially embouchure. Let's talk about overtones, because practicing sound on the saxophone is a little bit unique. There are fundamental fingerings, so let's start with a low C. I played an octave higher than the C, low C, octave higher than the C, and then a G. If you need to restart your air a little bit, you can. And what this is teaching us is to manage our air, and also manage, really not manage, but allow our ears to hear and tell our oral cavity and our embouchure, lower lip pressure, our whole mechanism in here, how to form each of these notes. So an analogy could be if I were to say E or oo or ah, each of those have a certain feel and shape inside the mouth. If I do that without making without using my vocal cords, each of those are a different shape. If I put a good amount of air with that, generally my tongue is kind of in the middle of my mouth, so now the overtones teach us to manage or manipulate the air ever so slightly. So number one, the intonation is precise, and number two, the notes actually speak. And so it's a very good way of practicing this, getting to know all the range of the saxophone. We can go higher and higher. Each of those notes, again, you develop a memory inside, and I don't want to just point to inside the mouth because actually it starts with the ears. I hear these sounds in my ears. My brain reacts and tells the entire mechanism, including the throat and the chest and the whole torso here. All of this engages, and the brain tells us what to do, essentially. And the way we get started is just to start with a low note. So for instance, a C. If you're not able to get anything above that just with this low fingering, here is a suggestion. Put your C down like this and put fingers down one at a time. 3, whole right hand down, and then this key here. To what the air feels like, the vibration of the reed on your lip, your lower lip, even paying attention to the upper lip as it wraps over the top of the mouthpiece. Okay, the next thing we can talk about is hand position. So I drop my right and left hands like this, I relax them, I pick them up, and now I have a nice curved finger. I want to have a slight diagonal on my right hand here so that I can access these top right side keys, and the same thing for the left hand. I want to have a little bit of a diagonal like this so that I can access these keys here and as well as get my top key, which I'll need for altissimo. And so this finger is always ready. If I'm coming in from the side like this, there's a lot of motion that has to happen in order to get those notes out. So I try to keep it as minimal motion as possible. The last thing, articulation. So if we have the saxophone angled correctly, where we have the neck strap up high enough and we're not reaching into the saxophone, but we're just pulling it towards us like this and letting it fall into our mouth, then I say and essentially my tongue is hitting just under the tip of the reed, or sometimes because of the angle of the saxophone, it's almost hitting directly on, but maybe not exactly directly on the mouthpiece and the reed, but maybe just a little bit under that. The easy way to describe it is just to say Now the biggest issue with articulation is air again. So blow a lot of air into your instrument. Don't be shy about that. And if you do that, you're sort of letting the tongue act as a little valve with one steady breath. For me, articulation boils down to two things and then some subcategories, but the primary things are air, a good amount of air, number one, and number two, a sense of pulse and subdivision of rhythm. If you can think of pulse and divisions of rhythm, divisions of pulse in your mind, your brain will tell your tongue what to do as long as the air is moving. Okay, I hope that helps, and thank you very much, and good luck to you all.